There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the camouflage of routine, of the mundane, of a simple Tuesday night. You don't recognize them as fault lines until the ground has already shifted beneath your feet, until the entire landscape of your world has been irrevocably altered. For me, that moment smelled of lemon dish soap and leftover garlic bread. It was the sound of water running in the sink and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. It was just us, cleaning up after dinner, a ritual we had performed 100 times before. But this time, a single, silent step changed everything, closing a distance I had spent years meticulously, painfully, maintaining. He had been rinsing plates, his back to me. I was drying, stacking the clean ceramic on the worn wooden drying rack I'd had since college. The space in my small kitchen is a carefully choreographed dance for two people, a narrow channel between the counter and the stove where you have to turn sideways to pass. We had mastered this dance. It was a comfortable, unconscious rhythm of sidesteps and gentle accommodations, a physical language that mirrored the easy cadence of our friendship. But then the water shut off. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was heavier than usual. I felt his stillness before I saw it. I felt the shift in the air, the way a room quiets just before a storm breaks. I finished wiping the last plate, my movements suddenly feeling loud and clumsy. I turned to put it away in the cupboard, and that's when I found him there, not at the sink, but beside me. He hadn't moved back to his station. He had moved to block mine. He cornered me against the counter. It wasn't aggressive, not a trap in the predatory sense. It was a movement of quiet, deliberate gravity, as if he were a celestial body that had finally slipped its orbit and was being pulled, inevitably, toward another. His nearness was a physical weight, pressing on the air, on my lungs. One of his hands came to rest on the granite countertop just beside my hip, his other braced on the cabinet next to my head. He had built a cage around me with his body, a soft cage of muscle and warmth and the familiar scent of his laundry detergent. I could see the faint constellation of freckles across the bridge of his nose, the way the dim kitchen light caught the silver flecks in his blue eyes, turning them the color of a twilight sea. His gaze wasn't fixed on my face, but on my mouth, and in that intense, unblinking focus, years of unspoken words, of carefully buried hopes, began to tremble and rise to the surface. My heart was no longer a steady beat in my chest. It was a wild, panicked bird, beating its wings against the cage of my ribs, desperate for an escape that I suddenly, terrifyingly, did not want. To understand the tectonic significance of that moment, you have to understand the foundation upon which it was built. You have to understand Liam. And you have to understand the architecture of the space I had built for him inside myself. We met in college, two swimmers thrown together by the chlorine-scented chaos of the university team. He was the star, the natural, a creature of effortless power and fluid grace in the water. His laughter was loud and frequent, echoing off the tiled walls of the natatorium, drawing people into his orbit like moths to a porch light. I was the opposite. I was a distant swimmer, a grinder, my success born not of raw talent, but of stubborn, methodical endurance. I was quiet, an observer by nature, my world viewed through the lens of the camera I carried everywhere, documenting the quiet moments between the loud victories. I saw the exhaustion in his eyes after a record-setting race, the slight tremor in his hands before a final, the way he would stare at the black line on the bottom of the pool as if it held all the answers. I photographed these things, these fragments of the real Liam that existed beneath the bright, confident surface. Our friendship wasn't instantaneous. It was a slow accretion, built layer by layer in the shared silences of early morning practices and the weary camaraderie of late-night study sessions. We were different in nearly every way, yet we fit together in the strange, complementary way that mismatched puzzle pieces sometimes do. He pulled me out of my shell, and I think, offered him a place of stillness, a harbor from the relentless pressure to be on all the time. He would talk for hours about his engineering classes, about the intricate logic of code, and I would listen, fascinated by the passion in his voice. I would show him my photographs, the way light could tell a story, how a shadow could hold more emotion than a smile, and he would look at them with a genuine, quiet curiosity that made me feel seen in a way I never had before. He was the only person who didn't just see the photos, he saw the eye behind them. He saw me. My feelings for him were a secret I kept locked in the deepest, most fortified room of my heart. They were there from the beginning, a low, constant hum beneath the surface of our friendship, an undertow that I learned to navigate with painstaking care. To me, our friendship was a precious, fragile thing, a piece of hand-blown glass. To admit my feelings felt like threatening to shatter it. So I became an expert in emotional self-preservation. I built walls. I established boundaries. I learned the subtle art of deflecting intimacy with a joke, of redirecting a moment that felt too charged. I dated other people. He dated other people. His longest relationship was with Sarah, a bright, kind woman who, for 4 years, was a constant presence in his life, and, by extension, mine. I liked her genuinely. And a selfish, shameful part of me was grateful for her presence, because she was a buffer, a clear and defined boundary that kept my own hopeless feelings safely contained. She was the lock on the door to that secret room. Then, about 6 months before that night in the kitchen, the lock broke. Their breakup wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was a slow, quiet erosion, a subsidence. They had simply grown in different directions, their futures no longer aligning. Liam was devastated, but not in the way you see in movies. He wasn't crying or screaming. He was just empty. It was like watching a vibrant, colorful landscape fade to grayscale. The light in his eyes dimmed. The easy laughter that had once been his native language became a rare and foreign tongue. He was adrift on a vast, featureless ocean, and the only landmark he could find was me. That was the shift, the catalyst. His apartment, once a shared space filled with Sarah's plants and art, suddenly felt cavernous and hostile to him. The silence there was different from the comfortable silence we shared. His silence was haunted by absence. Ours was filled with presence. So he started showing up at my door. At first, it was under pretexts. He needed to borrow a book. He wanted my opinion on a new project. He was just in the neighborhood. But soon, the pretenses fell away, worn down by the sheer weight of his loneliness. He would just appear, a ghost at my doorstep, with a 6-pack of beer and a hollow look in his eyes. He wasn't looking for advice or distraction. He was looking for an anchor. And I, against every self-preservation instinct I had honed for years, let him tie himself to me. This was the beginning of the ritual. It started with movie nights. We would sprawl on my old, comfortable couch, a bowl of popcorn between us, and lose ourselves in the flickering light of the screen. He would inevitably fall asleep before the credits rolled, his head slumping first onto the back of the couch, and then, slowly, incrementally, onto my shoulder. The first time it happened, my entire body went rigid. Every nerve ending screamed with a terrifying, exhilarating awareness of his proximity. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my neck, the weight of his head, solid and real and impossibly trusting. I sat there for over an hour, my own muscles cramping, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, terrified to move, to breathe, lest I wake him and break the spell. I studied the way his eyelashes rested against his cheek, the relaxed line of his mouth, the soft, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. It was a kind of exquisite torture to be granted this intimacy that meant everything to me and, I was sure, nothing to him beyond simple, platonic comfort. Eventually, I would manage to gently nudge him awake. He'd stir, blinking in the dim light, a disoriented, sheepish look on his face. "Sorry, man," he'd mumble, scrubbing a hand over his tired eyes. I crashed, and I would just nod, my voice carefully neutral. "It's fine." You were exhausted. He would gather his things and leave, and I would be left alone in the echoing silence of my apartment, the phantom weight of his head still imprinted on my shoulder, my carefully constructed walls trembling from the contact. The couch sleeping became a regular occurrence. It was our unspoken agreement. He needed a safe place to land, and I was willing to be that place, even if it cost me pieces of my own sanity. I told myself it was what any good friend would do. I told myself it was temporary, a stopgap measure until he found his footing again. But as the weeks bled into months, the ritual began to evolve, to escalate in ways that both thrilled and terrified me. One night, after a particularly long week at his consulting firm, he looked more wrecked than I had ever seen him. The shadows under his eyes were deep, bruised-looking smudges. He fell asleep on the couch almost immediately, but this time he was restless, twitching and murmuring in his sleep. I watched him, a painful ache blooming in my chest. He looked so lost. When I tried to wake him an hour later, he just groaned and burrowed his face deeper into my side. "Can't," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "My back is killing me on this thing." He shifted, trying to get comfortable, and then he looked up at me, his blue eyes cloudy and vulnerable in the half-light. "Jules, is it weird if I just crash in your bed? I promise I'll stay on my side." This couch is a medieval torture device. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken implications. My mind screamed 1,000 warnings. This is a line. This is a boundary you cannot uncross. Say no. Protect yourself. But my heart, that foolish, traitorous organ, saw only the exhaustion on his face, the genuine plea in his eyes. The fortress I had built around my feelings was formidable, but it was no match for the sight of Liam in pain. "Yeah," I heard myself say, the word feeling like it was pulled from someone else's lungs. "Yeah, of course. Don't be an idiot. Go." He gave me a grateful, sleepy smile that sent a dizzying jolt straight to my core. "You're the best," he whispered, and then he was gone, shuffling down the short hallway to my bedroom. I stood in the living room for a long time, listening to the soft sounds of him settling in. The rustle of sheets, a quiet sigh. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind pulling at me, the drop both terrifying and strangely tempting. I eventually retreated to the couch, the very couch he had just abandoned, pulling an Afghan over myself. I tried to sleep, but it was impossible. The knowledge of him, just down the hall, in my bed, in my space, was a humming, high-frequency current running through the entire apartment. My couch, once a place of comfort, now felt like a place of exile. I was a guest in my own home, locked out of the one room where my heart truly resided. This became the new ritual. He would come over, we would watch a movie or just talk, and when he got too tired to drive home, he would retreat to my bedroom, and I would take the couch. We never spoke about it directly. It was just what happened. A strange, reversed sleepover arrangement that we both accepted without comment. It was a state of exquisitely painful equilibrium. I had him closer than ever before, a constant, warm presence in my life, in my home. But the proximity was a constant reminder of the chasm between what we were and what I desperately wanted us to be. I was a starving man sitting at a feast, forbidden to eat. I would lie awake on the couch for hours, cataloging the sounds from the bedroom. The way he sighed in his sleep, the sound of him turning over, the creak of the mattress. Each sound was a small, sharp pinprick to my heart. One night, about a month into this new arrangement, I woke up on the couch in the dead of night, cold and stiff. I had a project deadline and had been up late working on edits, falling asleep with my laptop still balanced on my chest. I sat up, my back protesting, and decided I needed a glass of water. As I walked past my bedroom, I noticed that the door, which I always kept closed, was slightly ajar. A thin blade of moonlight cut through the opening, illuminating a narrow strip of the wooden floor. I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Curiosity, a dangerous and powerful force, compelled me to push it open just a fraction more. I peeked inside. Liam was asleep on his side, facing the door. One arm was flung out over the empty space next to him, his hand resting on the pillow where my head should have been. His face, in the soft, forgiving moonlight, was completely unguarded. The stress and weariness that had etched themselves onto his features over the past few months were smoothed away, leaving him looking younger, more peaceful. He looked like the boy I had met all those years ago by the pool. The sight was so intimate, so profoundly tender, that it felt like a physical blow. It was a glimpse into a world I was not supposed to see, a stolen moment of vulnerability. I felt a surge of something fierce and protective, followed immediately by a wave of the most profound loneliness I had ever experienced. The space beside him was an invitation and a rejection all at once. I quietly pulled the door almost closed, leaving it just as I had found it, a tiny crack of light escaping into the dark hall. The open door became a new, silent feature of our ritual. He never mentioned it, and neither did I. But every night he stayed, he would leave the door cracked open just a little. I became obsessed with it. It felt symbolic, a metaphor I couldn't stop analyzing. Was it a subconscious gesture? A sign of trust? An accident? Or, in my wildest, most hopeful fantasies, was it an invitation? Was he, on some level, leaving a way in for me? I would stand in the hallway late at night, staring at that thin sliver of light, my mind a whirlwind of hope and fear. It was a threshold I was terrified to cross. That open door represented the vast, unspoken territory between us, a space filled with ambiguity and risk. To step through it would be to demand an answer to a question I was too afraid to ask. So I remained in the hallway, in the safe, painful limbo of the unknown. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in November. The weather was miserable, a cold, persistent drizzle that seemed to seep into the very bones of the city. Liam had a brutal day at work, a client presentation had gone sideways, and he arrived at my apartment looking like a soldier returning from a losing battle. He barely spoke, just dropped his messenger bag by the door, shed his damp coat, and collapsed onto the couch. I made us pasta, a simple, comforting meal, and we ate mostly in silence, the only sounds the clinking of our forks and the drumming of the rain against the window pane. I didn't push him to talk. I knew he just needed to decompress, to be in a space where nothing was expected of him. After dinner, we began the familiar ritual of cleaning up. The routine was soothing, its predictability a small anchor in a sea of emotional turmoil. He rinsed, I dried. The motions were automatic, a muscle memory shared between us. But the silence in the kitchen that night was different. It wasn't the comfortable, easy silence we usually shared. It was fraught, heavy, charged with all the tension of his terrible day and all the unspoken feelings that had been simmering between us for months. I could feel it coiling in the small space, a palpable, living thing. I was so focused on the plate in my hand, on the simple, repetitive motion of wiping it dry, that I didn't register the moment the water stopped running. I didn't register his stillness until I turned and found him there, standing between me and the rest of the world. And so we were back to that moment, the moment the ground shifted. He stood before me, his body caging me in, his eyes locked on my mouth. The air crackled. My carefully constructed walls, already weakened by months of sustained emotional proximity, began to crumble. Every rational thought I had fled, replaced by a singular, overwhelming awareness of him. The heat radiating from his chest, the scent of rain still clinging to his hair, the tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in the hand he had braced on the cabinet beside my head. He was as nervous as I was. That realization struck me with the force of a physical impact. This wasn't just him seeking thoughtless comfort. This was something else. This was intention. His gaze finally lifted from my mouth to meet my eyes. The twilight sea of his irises was turbulent, filled with a storm of emotions I couldn't begin to name. Confusion, fear, and something else, something deeper and more vulnerable. It was a look that stripped away all his defenses, all the easy confidence he used as armor. In that moment, he was just Liam, lost and scared, and looking at me as if I were the only solid thing in a world that was dissolving around him. He swallowed, the sound loud in the charged silence. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, a rough, frayed thing. "Jules." I couldn't speak. I could only nod, a tiny, jerky movement. My entire world had shrunk to the space between our bodies, to the few inches of air that felt more solid and significant than anything I had ever known. "I'm so tired," he breathed, and it was a confession. He wasn't just talking about work or the rain or his breakup. He was talking about a weariness that went bone deep, a soul-level exhaustion from trying to hold himself together, from navigating the wreckage of his old life, from pretending he was okay. And then he did the one thing I had spent years dreaming of and dreading in equal measure. He leaned in. It was a slow, hesitant movement, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to turn my head, to put up a hand and stop him. It was a question asked not with words, but with motion. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate plea. Stop him. Don't let him do this. Don't let him shatter everything. But my body betrayed me. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, held captive by the gravitational pull of his need and my own long-suppressed desire. I closed my eyes and I waited. His lips touched mine. It wasn't a passionate, demanding kiss. It was soft, tentative, and deeply uncertain. It was the lightest of pressures, a ghost of a touch, a question mark pressed against my mouth. It tasted of salt and rain and a loneliness so profound it broke my heart. It lasted for only a second, maybe two, but in that brief contact, the entire foundation of our friendship cracked. A fault line opened up, and we both fell in. When he pulled back, his eyes were wide, filled with a dawning panic. He looked at me, then at the space he had created around me, as if seeing it for the first time. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a dream to find himself in a place he didn't recognize. He dropped his hands from the counter as if it had burned him. He took a step back, then another, putting a universe of distance between us in the tiny kitchen. The cage was gone, but I felt more trapped than ever. He started, his voice cracking. He shook his head, unable to find the words. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I'm just messed up. Forget it. And then he was gone. He grabbed his coat and his bag and fled my apartment, leaving the front door swinging open behind him, letting the cold, damp November air rush in. I stood frozen, my back pressed against the counter, my fingers rising to touch my lips. The kiss was already a fading memory, a phantom warmth, but the devastation it left in its wake was absolute. The ground had shifted, just as I'd always feared, but it hadn't been a gentle realignment. It had been an earthquake, and I was left standing alone in the ruins. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. A silent, agonizing void where our friendship used to be. My apartment, once my sanctuary, a place filled with the comfortable ghost of his presence, now felt like a tomb. Every corner held a memory that mocked me. The couch where he used to sleep, the kitchen counter where everything had fallen apart, the hallway leading to the bedroom with its perpetually cracked open door, which was now firmly, resolutely shut. I kept my own door shut now, as if to physically contain the damage, to prevent the ache in my chest from spilling out and consuming my entire home. He didn't call. He didn't text. My own messages to him, a tentative "Hey, are you okay?" followed by a more desperate "Liam, please just talk to me," when unanswered, sitting in the cold, digital purgatory of a read receipt. The silence was a corrosive acid, eating away at my certainty, at my hope. I replayed the moment in the kitchen 1,000 times, analyzing it from every possible angle, the way I would examine a photograph in the darkroom, searching for hidden details in the shadows. Had I imagined the vulnerability in his eyes? Had I misinterpreted the desperate, questioning nature of the kiss? Had I projected all of my own yearning onto a simple, misguided moment of loneliness on his part? The thought was a cold, sharp blade twisting in my gut. Maybe he hadn't been pulled by gravity. Maybe he had just been falling, and I was simply the first thing he could grab onto. A temporary handhold, not a destination. The shame of it was a physical weight, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I had allowed myself, for one brief, intoxicating second, to hope. And the universe, it seemed, was punishing me for it. I tried to function. I went to my studio. I worked on my projects. I tried to lose myself in the familiar, methodical process of developing film. But my focus was shattered. The images I captured felt flat and lifeless. The light I had always been so adept at chasing and capturing seemed to have vanished from the world, leaving only dull, oppressive shades of gray. I saw his face everywhere. In the face of a stranger on the street, in the shadows of an empty alley, in the reflection of my own tired eyes in the window. He was a phantom limb, an ache in a place where something essential used to be. Our friendship had been the central pillar of my life for so long that its sudden absence left the entire structure of my world unstable and on the verge of collapse. After a week of this agonizing silence, I knew I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing was worse than any possible truth. Even if the truth was that he regretted it, that it was a mistake, that he couldn't look at me anymore, I had to hear it. I needed the finality of it. I needed the wound to be cauterized, so I could at least begin the long, painful process of healing. The ambiguity was an open, festering wound, and it was poisoning me. So, with a heart that felt like a lead weight in my chest, I drove to his apartment. I had no plan. I had no prepared speech. I had only a desperate, visceral need for an ending to the silence. His building was one of those new, sterile glass and steel boxes that had sprung up all over the city. It felt anonymous and cold, so different from the lived-in warmth of my own small place. As I stood in the harshly lit hallway outside his door, I almost lost my nerve. My hand hovered over the doorbell, trembling. What was I even doing here? Forcing a confrontation he so clearly wanted to avoid. But the thought of returning to my empty, silent apartment was more terrifying than whatever rejection might be waiting for me on the other side of this door. I took a deep breath, and I rang the bell. I heard movement inside, a shuffling sound, and then silence. For a long moment, I thought he wasn't going to answer. I could picture him on the other side, frozen, hoping I would just go away. I was about to turn and leave when the locks clicked and the door opened a few inches. He stood there, framed in the narrow opening, looking even worse than he had the week before. He was wearing the same gray sweatshirt he'd had on that night, now wrinkled and stained. His hair was a mess, and his eyes, when they met mine, were haunted. They were red-rimmed, exhausted, and filled with a deep, bottomless panic. He looked like a cornered animal. "Jules," he said, his voice a hoarse croak. He didn't open the door any wider. He was blocking the entrance, a mirror image of how he had blocked me in my kitchen, but this time it was a barrier, not a cage. "Liam," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. "We need to talk." He shook his head, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. "There's nothing to talk about. I already said I was sorry. It was a mistake." The words were like stones, heavy and lifeless. He was reciting a script he had clearly been practicing for days. But his eyes told a different story. His eyes were pleading with me to believe the lie, to accept it and go away, to let him retreat back into the safety of his denial. And that's when something inside me, something that had been cowering in fear and shame for a week, finally snapped. It was a quiet, cold anger. An anger born of hurt and frustration. I had spent years protecting his feelings, protecting our friendship, swallowing my own needs. I had been his rock, his anchor, his safe harbor. And he was going to dismiss what had happened between us as a drunken mistake? He was going to throw away years of friendship because he was too scared to face one moment of terrifying, beautiful honesty? No, I wouldn't let him. No, I said, my voice low but firm. It wasn't a mistake. It was something. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't a mistake, and you don't get to just disappear. You don't get to do that to me. To us, I took a step forward, forcing him to either let me in or physically push me away. "Look at me, Liam, and tell me the truth. Not some pathetic excuse you came up with because you're scared. The truth." For a second, I thought he was going to slam the door in my face. His jaw was clenched, so tight a muscle jumped along his cheek. The battle being waged inside him was visible on his face. The fear was there, but so was the exhaustion, the same soul-deep weariness I had seen in him that night in the kitchen. And then, in a moment, the fight just seemed to go out of him. His shoulders slumped in defeat. The rigid, defensive posture he was holding dissolved, and he just looked broken. He opened the door wider and stepped back, letting me in. His apartment was a disaster. Takeout containers were stacked on the coffee table, clothes were strewn over the furniture, and a layer of dust coated every surface. The air was stale and heavy. It was the physical manifestation of his mental state, chaotic, neglected, and suffocatingly lonely. He didn't turn on any lights, leaving us in the dim, gray twilight filtering through the large windows. He walked over to the window and stood with his back to me, staring out at the rain-streaked cityscape. "I don't know what the truth is, Jules," he said, his voice quiet and raw. "That's the problem. I've spent my whole life on a track. You know? Go to school, get good grades, swim fast, get a good job, have a girlfriend. It was all laid out. A blueprint. I knew who I was supposed to be." He ran a hand through his messy hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "When Sarah and I broke up, the blueprint just dissolved. And I'm lost. I have been for months. And you were the only thing that felt real. The only thing that made sense." He turned to face me then, and his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "Being at your place, it was the only time I felt quiet inside. The only time I didn't feel like I was vibrating with anxiety. And that night, I don't know what happened. I had a terrible day, and I came to your place, and we were just cleaning up, and suddenly, all I could think about was how I didn't want to go back to the couch, how I didn't want to be in the other room. All I wanted was to stay right there, with you. To just stop running." His confession hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. It was more than I had ever dared to hope for. He wasn't dismissing it. He was admitting to the same gravitational pull I had felt. "Kissing you," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It felt inevitable. Like it was the only possible thing that could happen in that moment. And it felt right. For a second, it felt so right. And that scared the hell out of me. Because it's not on the blueprint, Jules. This isn't on any map I've ever seen. I've never felt that for a guy, for a friend." And I panicked. I saw the look on your face, and I realized what I had done. I had taken our friendship, the one good, stable thing I had left in my life, and I had put a bomb under it. So I ran. Because I didn't know how to fix it, and I was terrified of what it meant. I listened to his words, and the cold anger inside me melted away, replaced by a wave of empathy so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. He wasn't rejecting me. He was terrified. He was a man whose entire identity had been built on a rigid set of external expectations. And for the first time, his own heart was telling him to go off script. He wasn't scared of me. He was scared of himself. I closed the distance between us, walking slowly across the messy living room until I was standing in front of him. I reached out and gently took his hand. His fingers were ice cold. He flinched at my touch, but didn't pull away. "You didn't put a bomb under it," I said softly. "Liam, look at me." He reluctantly lifted his gaze to mine. "Do you have any idea how long I have felt this way about you?" A flicker of utter shock crossed his face. "What?" "For years," I admitted, the confession feeling like a weight lifting off my soul. "I have loved you for years. I just got very, very good at hiding it. Because our friendship was too important to risk. I was the one who was terrified of putting a bomb under it. What you did in the kitchen, you didn't break anything. You just finally said out loud the thing I had been whispering to myself in the dark for a decade." The look on his face was one of dawning, staggering comprehension. He stared at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. All the small moments, all the shared silences, all the things he had probably taken for granted as simple friendship were now being recontextualized in his mind through this new lens. He was seeing the truth of my photographs, the reason I was always there, the reason my apartment felt like a home to him. It wasn't just friendship. It was a love that had been patiently, quietly waiting for him all along. "Oh," he breathed, the single word holding a world of regret and revelation. "Jules, I'm so stupid." "No," I said, squeezing his hand. "You're not stupid. You're just new at this. And you're scared, which is okay. To be honest, I'm terrified right now." A small, watery smile touched his lips. "Yeah? You seem to be handling it a lot better than I am. That's because I've had a lot more practice," I said, my own smile feeling shaky but real. "So, here's what we're going to do. You're going to stop hiding in this disaster zone of an apartment, and we're going to figure it out. Together. No blueprint. No map. We just walk, and we see where the path goes. Can you do that?" He looked down at our joined hands, then back up at my face. The panic in his eyes was still there, but it was being slowly eclipsed by something else. A fragile, tentative flicker of hope. He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think I can do that." The resolution wasn't a sudden, cinematic explosion of passion. It was quieter, more profound. It was the slow, steady dawn after a long, stormy night. We didn't kiss again that day. Instead, I stayed, and we cleaned his apartment. It felt symbolic. We were literally and figuratively clearing out the chaos, making space for something new. We worked in a comfortable silence, the old rhythm of our friendship reasserting itself, but with a new, underlying current of intention. It was no longer a friendship of carefully maintained boundaries. It was a partnership of shared vulnerability. That night, he came back to my apartment with me. He was hesitant as we stood in the hallway, the closed bedroom door looming between us like a monument to our recent conflict. I saw the uncertainty in his eyes. Without a word, I reached out, took his hand again, and led him into the bedroom. I didn't retreat to the couch. I got into bed, on my side, and I held back the covers for him. It was a simple, unambiguous invitation, an offering of shared space, of shared warmth, with no pretexts or plausible deniability. He watched me for a long moment. Then he walked around the bed and slid in beside me. We lay there in the dark, face to face, the way I had dreamed of for so long. The silence was different now. It wasn't charged with unspoken tension or agonizing uncertainty. It was peaceful. It was a silence of acceptance, of arrival. He reached out a hand and tentatively brushed a stray piece of hair from my forehead. His touch was feather-light, filled with a sense of wonder, as if he were discovering a new texture, a new world. "Is this okay?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's more than okay," I whispered back. He moved closer, closing the small gap between us, and rested his forehead against mine. I could feel his breath on my lips, warm and steady. He didn't kiss me. He just stayed there, breathing with me, sharing the same small pocket of air in the quiet dark. In that moment, I understood that true intimacy wasn't about grand gestures or passionate declarations. It was about this, the quiet, terrifying, beautiful honesty of two people choosing to be vulnerable in the same space at the same time. It was the profound peace of finding a safe harbor in another person's presence. In the weeks and months that followed, we began to build our new foundation, not on an old, dissolved blueprint, but on a new, shared reality. The rituals changed. Movie nights on the couch now ended with us tangled together, his head on my chest, my arms wrapped around him. There was no more retreat to separate sleeping spaces. My bed became our bed. The door to my bedroom, which had once been a symbol of his subconscious invitation and my own fearful hesitation, was now closed every night. Not to shut the world out, but to keep us in. To consecrate the space as ours, a private, sacred room built for two. We were learning a new language together, a language of gentle touches, of quiet mornings making coffee, of holding hands while walking down the street. It was a language spoken not in grand pronouncements, but in 1,000 small, daily affirmations of presence and care. He was still scared sometimes. I could see it in his eyes. Moments of doubt where the old map tried to reassert itself. But he never ran again. He would just reach for my hand, and I would hold on tight, and we would navigate the uncertainty together. One Saturday morning, I woke up to find him already awake, propped up on an elbow, just watching me. The early morning light streamed through the window, painting golden stripes across the bedsheets. He looked peaceful, the old haunted look completely gone from his eyes, replaced by a soft, steady warmth that made my heart ache in the best possible way. "What?" I asked, my voice still rough with sleep. He smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached all the way to his eyes. The kind of smile I hadn't seen on his face in a very long time. "Nothing," he said. "I was just thinking. This whole time, I thought I was lost because my life plan fell apart. But maybe I was just lost because I wasn't on the right path to begin with." He leaned down and pressed a soft, sure kiss to my lips. "I think I'm home now," and I knew, in that moment, that I was too. The room I had kept locked inside myself for so long was no longer a secret, solitary place. The door had been thrown wide open, and it was filled with light. We had found our way out of the wreckage, not by trying to rebuild what was broken, but by having the courage to build something entirely new, something stronger and more honest than anything that had come before. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned, finally, to create together.